The lesson that we have today from the book of Isaiah that Carl read so well marks a kind of aha moment in the life of our religious tradition. The story up to that point had been the story of the evolution in the relationship between God and God's chosen people. There was a part of Genesis that retold some of the old traditional Mesopotamian stories, sort of demythologizing them in a way. But then the body of the tradition dealt with beginning with the call of Abraham, the history of salvation as it came through his line. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob follow God's call. Joseph is taken into Egypt, and the people later become enslaved there. Moses brings them out, and they receive the law on Mount Sinai. The people enter into the promised land. The tribes come together and eventually choose a king, Saul and David and Solomon. And then the kingdom divides into two kingdoms. And they have their various ups and downs, guided or not by prophets inspired by God. And things are seen as going well when the relationship of the chosen people with God is good. And when it's not good, things go wrong. Like when the whole 10 tribes of the northern kingdom are conquered and lose their identity. But it was a story about them, mostly, about God, too, but God in relationship to this chosen people. The 40th chapter of Isaiah begins a section of the book of Isaiah that was written in Babylon. The southern two tribes, the kingdom of Judah, were eventually conquered as well as the north and were taken into exile, but they didn't lose their identity. They kept together and kept the tradition. But there in Babylon, just after the Persian king Cyrus had conquered the Babylonians, this author took up his pen. And that conquest by Cyrus very much affected the Judean people, certainly, who were in exile, including the writer. Cyrus would allow the people to return to the Holy Land. He would authorize the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. And Cyrus is called the Messiah by this writer, God's anointed one for his people. But there's a lot more than that to this insight that the prophet displays in this passage. Because it's not about him here. It's not even really about the chosen people here. It's about God. God beyond them. It's the recognition that this God, that this writer had worshipped as his God, that this people had worshipped as their God, was way, 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 way beyond that in glory. This God was the creative source behind and beyond the stars, behind and beyond all that was, all creation, behind and beyond the universe. The source, the sustainer. Infinitely transcendent and yet a presence in every square inch of the earth in Jerusalem or Babylon or the farthest places that this writer had never even imagined. And intimately woven into and weaving into the life of every person and every thing. It was true that through the traditions of his people, their stories about their ancestors, their laws, their temple rituals, their family rules and regulations, the teachings of their rabbis, this writer had what I believe was a true relationship with God, but from a realistic point of view, in no way is this writer, or could this writer possibly claim an exclusive relationship with God. God was beyond anything that he could imagine. And it's apparent, to me at least, in this passage that he was aware of that. He acknowledges that in the awesome wonder that he experiences as God in the world, that it's not about him. It's not about his people. It's not really even about human history, where even princes and rulers, whatever people they may belong to, amount to nothing. It's only in the light of this one who is beyond all that is, that what is takes on any meaning at all. And I think that Paul experienced that in his initial vision that struck him blind. And he tries to express it in Christian language. He says that Jew, Greek, slave, free, law-abiding, not law-abiding, our categories don't matter. They're irrelevant for the relationship with ultimate truth, ultimate reality. They can point to this truth, but they can never define it. They can participate with the life of God, but never own it. People often think of church, of religion, as a part of their life, an important part or not so important part of their life. It may be a familiar pattern, a comfortable habit, a family tradition that seems worth carrying on. And there's nothing wrong with that. Going to church, living a Christian life. And we may feel that the church is helpful for us in some way. Helpful for our families in some ways, for our nation in some ways. I know I look around and have concern that fewer people seem involved in churches, and although, yeah, sure, there was often hypocrisy involved in that, and people just went for show, I think it made a difference. There seems to be a growth in not only the acceptance, but the honoring of greed and dominance, of materialism, a lessening of compassion and empathy, more division, more competition, and less unity, less cooperation, less brotherly love, to use a maybe corny term that's in the Bible. And those feelings may be calling us to a more active Christian ministry, to a wider sharing of the good news that we've found in our relationship with God through the church, to a more active concern for the poor who don't have what we have, to a deeper investigation or discernment into our own meaning, our own integrity, our own wholeness. How are we living out the fact that we are God's chosen people now? And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all good. Helen Staten, who comes at 8 o'clock, no matter you tell her anything's happening, there was half the earth was blown up. Oh, it's all good. Everything's all good. So it's good. She's right in a way. But none of that really has much to do with God's presence or power vis-a-vis the world. The world today is no less in God's control than when the church was at the center of everybody's life. A religious tradition of at most 5,000 years and a religious institution of less than 2,000 years are not the only means of access to a relationship with the one who is the source of a universe that's been around for 14 billion years. It's kind of arrogant to think it is. And maybe there's other universes before, alongside, beyond that. Who knows? With the writer of this section of the book of Isaiah that begins with chapter 40, we can acknowledge that we only see a piece, but that piece is important. We've stumbled somehow on an awesome awareness of everything. Yeah, we've developed science a lot, and that tells us certain things about certain qualities in the world that helps us control and be creative and be involved to a certain extent, although we're certainly fallible in it. But in this insight into there being this source that within our tradition we've gained connection with and relationship with is amazing. We've entered into Holy Communion with it, him, her, there's no pronouns that are adequate. Them, we feel the presence here, I think, in the church, in this place, in our lives as Christians. I do, at least. Can't always define it and describe it, but I think that makes it more real, not less. But we're not called to be gatekeepers into the presence. Sometimes we may be called to be ushers, but it doesn't have to do with us. And exclusivist faith is arrogant and narcissistic, to use a current concept. And it's really kind of pathetically funny, or would be if it didn't have such disabling and even deadly potential. We may have come to church thinking it's all about us as a helpful or good part of our lives. But with this awareness that we share with that writer, we can leave here with the realization that we're all about it. God's not a part of our life. We're a part of God's life. And we need to go and live that out. Knowing God in the way that this writer came to know God It may not change any particular aspects of our life, but it can make all the difference in the world. It can raise us up on eagle's wings, bear us on the breath of dawn, make us shine like the sun. He holds us in the palm of his hand. Thanks be to God.